New Zealand companies can do real technical things on a shoestring budget. We've got this nice mix of semi-corporate family business, privately owned New Zealand-based manufacturer that is truly innovative, and it comes up with some really cool ideas.
Welcome back to another episode of a Kiwi Original. Today on the show, I'm joined by Gareth Innes from EPL Group, and we're going to be talking about creating solutions for businesses or for particular use cases that require the use of innovative polymers, both plastic and the recyclable versions. So there's some interesting things going on in this space, and without EPL, there's a lot of organizations that are household brands that maybe wouldn't be able to finish their product without these individual components. So a really interesting part of the supply chain. So first of all, Gareth, thank you very much for joining me and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So I guess first question, EPL, what does it stand for? And when you're explaining to customers what you do, what is that part?
So EPL is Elastomer Products Limited. We're coming up to our 47th year next year. Fisher and Paykel Shamrock Shacklock Industries was our founding partner and founding customer. We were set up by Jerry O'Neill and Neil Waterman, and then a year later Tom Thompson joined, and Tom's been owner of the company since for a very long time. So we've kind of gone in all sorts of directions over those 47 years and worked with some of the very well-known companies in New Zealand. Because of that association with Fisher and Paykel, when they moved to Thailand, we moved to Thailand too. So we've got an operation in Thailand and in New Zealand, and we actually export around the world. Products, we mainly do extrusion, so plastic extrusion, and injection moulding. Head office is in Christchurch. We have an R&D centre and manufacturing facility here. And then in Rayon City in Thailand, we have an R&D centre, sales centre, and manufacturing facility.
Okay, so that's a good part to I guess, start on. What's when a customer comes to you with a problem and says, I'm thinking this is the type of thing I'd like molded up, what are some of the things that they should be bearing in mind, either in terms of what's possible or the number of units they're going to have to produce to make that initial mold pay for itself, the types of things that customers are expecting now? What are all the things that you help with in terms of the elastomer side of things?
So just about what's unique with our customer base is that 90% of our products are made for one particular customer. So everything from the die design to the profile design is designed around that customer and their needs, and it's designed to fit into their product and their system. So the very first thing is they need to know what's going to happen or what they need that product to do, and what sort of environment it's going to live in, and what sort of system they want it to be incorporated in. Because it's at that front end and being involved in that design process, that's when you can get material selection right, you can get design, you can tweak the design right, you can integrate it into their system better. So we really like to be involved in the process as early as we possibly can. And it's quite often we get customers coming in and it's just purely a concept, and they're going, well, what do you think about this? And then we start going down that rabbit hole.
What would be some of the interesting business problems that your products have solved recently that kind of surprised you when your customer came in and said, here's what we want to do?
I'm always surprised. I'm genuinely always surprised at the products we've been involved in. We literally have a cupboard in here, and it's in one of the guys' office, in Johnny's office. I just love diving into it because all the things we've done over the years, and quite often I dive into that and go, hello, there goes a new market opportunity. I'll jump into that and dive into that. But it's just we were involved with Fisher and Paykel with the dish drawer. in the early stages, and we're a critical part of that, and that's one we're very proud of. We do quite a few of building systems and rigid systems, and we do quite a bit of work with Resin construction, and there's a couple of profiles in there which are quad extrusions, and when you see them, what they can do and how they perform, it's just incredible how the guys came up with it, worked with Resin, and came through the process. Yeah, we're always involved in heaps of different cool projects, which I just get a buzz out of.
Let's take a couple of those that you've mentioned. The first one with Fisher and Paykel and the drawers, which I think the spark for that idea, if I recall correctly, was someone looked at a filing cabinet at work and said, imagine if those were, as a dishwasher, you wouldn't have to open this levered single cap drawer, and instead you'd have one set of dishes that are dirty and one set that are clean. I'm guessing the part that you played in that is the seal around the drawers. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that's one of the key components was the seal that allowed it to seal when the door was closed to stop the water getting out. So in the first prototype and the first production days, those were inflatable seals, which were very, very clever. The thinking that went into them to make sure that it would work in a totally new concept. It's pretty cool to see.
And the second one was Resin. I've seen you've got a case study here on your website for Resin construction. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Resin is a great New Zealand company, and they are very clever in what they're doing and how they're trying to make it better for their customers and for their business. So we have a very good relationship with them. And Mark Fluellen, who's one of their engineers, he comes up with these ideas, and he comes to us and goes, "Can you make this work?" And because the way we work and we bounce off ideas, it's amazing how quick their products can come together. We've got one in the works at the moment, which it's going to be incredibly fast turnaround because we're just bouncing ideas and we're just making things work. It's that number 8 Kiwi partnership working together to get to an end goal, and that collaboration that I really love and enjoy.
I think that's something that's probably not as well understood in the broader New Zealand community is just how much collaboration goes on between manufacturers to solve problems in a creative way, and that each manufacturer provides their own set of unique core skills that when you combine, for example, what Resin does and with what you do, you can come up with something that individually neither of you could have achieved for a market solution.
Yes, yeah. I think it's the only way that on a world scale New Zealand can compete is by developing an ecosystem within New Zealand where we all collab and work with each other. That's why, as an aside, we're working with Scion on the biopolymers and working with other companies, because if we take a systems approach of it and over view of everything, it just means we get it to a better resolution at the end, a better product that's able to compete.
Gareth, what got you into the polymer business initially?
I've been with EPL for 3 years, or coming up to 3 years. What drew me to EPL was New Zealand manufacture. It is truly innovative. Like it's cool. I'll never forget the first time I walked around the factory and I saw some of the things they were doing. I actually saw one of the Resin profiles getting manufactured, and I thought, holy moly, this is some really cool stuff. And the team and the environment within the team And also the way that EPL, it's about the community too. We support a lot of organisations as well, and it's about the family. So we've got this nice mix of a semi-corporate family business, privately owned, New Zealand-based manufacturer that is truly innovative, and it comes up with some really cool ideas. It's brilliant.
And you're based in Christchurch, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
I was talking to interviewed Dawn Aerospace, Stefan Powell, and they're based in the Canterbury region, and he said it's so important to us that we can reach into local manufacturing for what we need to build our space planes. And I thought, what an opportunity for Christchurch manufacturers to be able to feed in to some of this latest thinking of getting products into space to launch satellites.
I mean, how cool is that? Who would have thought about that like 20 years ago? I've got a little son who's 15 months, and I look at him and go, well, you could be an astronaut. And it's not, it's not out of the realms of possibilities. It's what we're doing here is pretty awesome. It's pretty cool. It's also interesting seeing the change since COVID and the interruption with the supply chains of people wanting to come back and bring their production back into New Zealand because they can't get the products overseas or the supply chain, and that's really quite cool to see. I think we need to do more of that.
That's interesting. So you've actually noticed that are people wanting to choose New Zealand as a lower risk supply chain option, or is it because their incumbent hasn't been able to supply?
It's a bit of both, actually. There's a bit of the supply chain interrupted, can't get it, or we don't know how long this is going to happen or go for, so let's bring it back. I think a bit of it is let's support New Zealand, and we need to do that. So that's quite pleasing to see. So when cost gets involved, that's the tricky thing. Like, you can't have something built in New Zealand with all the bells and whistles and compete against China. So there has to be a conscious decision there. But it is pleasing to see that New Zealand companies are trying to support New Zealand companies.
Do you find that the sweet spot for the types of products that you manufacture are where there is a quality or a longevity or a safety requirement that overrides some of the higher cost bases that we have here for manufacturing, such as the wage price, the regulatory system, that in order to compete with offshore in a market like China, that you have to compete on quality and product or service attributes rather than just on a pure cost basis?
Yeah, I'd agree. It's all the above, and it's also the technical nature. By definition, as a generalisation, New Zealand companies can do real technical things on a shoestring budget, and I think that's what attracts businesses to companies like ours. Because if you go overseas and you attempt some of these, there's a lot more cost, there's a lot more risk. You have to manage the supply chain. You have to order in bulk and bring stuff in by bulk. And then if it's all faulty, what do you do then? You can't send it back to the manufacturer. It's that control of that supply chain. And it's also interesting to see in tender specifications now, they're saying, can you confirm your company is not using child labour? And I was actually literally looking at a document this morning with that on it, which I thought that's really interesting, because if you're importing from an unknown company overseas, which you can't go and visit at the moment, and then how do you know these sort of questions? Where are they sourcing it? What sort of manufacturing process? So there's a lot of risk assurance with coming to a New Zealand company and knowing what you're getting.
And certainly, I think for businesses who are holding their values out or are purpose-led organisations, then there is a higher onus on those companies to choose suppliers that reflect that same set of values. So if an organisation like yours has that and can sign up and say, yeah, there is no child labour, then that creates a differentiation against somewhere like China, who was, at least it was disclosed in the media, I think over the last week, that there was 300 and something concentration camps for the Uyghur population, where some of them are connected to manufacturing hubs, and they're potentially using those people as forced labour within those camps to manufacture products cheaply.
Yeah, it's just it's very scary what can happen in some of these overseas places. And with what we do in Thailand, it's really interesting. Thailand really protects its workers as a government. It's a really interesting culture, and there's similarities there in the way they protect and they look after their people. So that makes it a good fit and makes us a good fit in that sort of environment.
What's the next step? Because for EPL, I'm sure, like many businesses this year, has thrown up a lot of curveballs that you probably weren't expecting. What have you learned from this year that you'll be able to carry into next year as an opportunity or a risk to avoid?
Well, it was interesting. In January, we had a strategic meeting between the exec where we outlaid a plan for the year, and this was about the biopolymers and working and developing and dedicating some more resources into that area in the bioeconomy. And it was a stroke of genius that we did that over the COVID period and got into that, because that's just opening up some new opportunities and allowing us to bring a better offering to our customers and also open up new markets for us. Plus, we get a huge amount of learning out of what we're doing in the development work we've done this year, which will help speed things up for us and our customers going forward. So that's been, it was a stroke of genius, and it's set us up for the next sort of 5 years.
And that, when you say biopolymer, that for the audience, that means biodegradable polymers rather than polymers that don't degrade, that are made of plastic. Is that right?
It's polymers made out of biomass. So you can have petrochemical based materials that degrade, or you can have natural based materials, biomass that degrades. But there's also polymers which aren't designed to degrade. So we have polydegrade, which is designed just to last, and that's more aimed at sort of the horticulture, agriculture, viticulture industries. So we're developing a vine clip, and we've been working with Scion for that, because there's anywhere between 15 million and 13 million vine clips used every year on the vineyards, and they only are up for 6 weeks, and then they go into the soil, and it's plastic in the soil, and like the vineyards, the winemakers are going, well, we've got to pick that all up. So what we've developed with Scion, or helped develop, is a clip that will degrade. So when it hits in the right conditions, hits the soil, gets a bit of moisture, and at the end of it is carbon dioxide and H2O, which is pretty clever, and it's using waste streams, from New Zealand, from New Zealand industries to create that. So it's about reducing waste. Then we've got another biopolymer called polynatural. That's sort of a longer term project, but that's not actually designed to degrade. So it's made out of biomass. It's designed in certain situations to be a substitute for petrochemical based plastics. that's pretty cool. And we've got a bit of development work to still do on that. But that's the sort of thing that we need to be able to offer to our customers, so then they can get a leg up and they can take that message and use that as part of their marketing strategy and part of their strategy to win tenders.
What you're talking about here, it really resonates in that I was on a call with the executive director for the Sustainable Business Council yesterday, Mike Burrow, and I asked him the question. So, what should New Zealand manufacturers be doing in order to get ready for this coming period of change where more regulations coming? And he said, you've got to front foot it. And across a number of different areas, heating, transport, and so on, one of the things he said was, look at your plastics manufacturing, whether it's a component or whether it's a wrapper, look at that and see whether there's a different way of doing it. So I'm thinking that for EPL Group, you could be an enabler for New Zealand manufacturers to be able to move away from plastic where they don't need it to last more than a few weeks or a season in the example you gave with the vine clips there.
Yeah, that's exactly where we're heading. We're having to do some development on our own back because we're experimenting. We're playing with things, but already some of the things that we're developing, the byproducts of it, are going to be really cool. It's really going, and it's really simple thought process when you look back on it, but it's really going to help reduce that footprint for our customers.
That's awesome to hear. And sometimes it's the simplest things that are actually the hardest to come up with, because they're not immediately that obvious until you really start thinking about it. And also you're dealing with physics, right? Like you're dealing with chemistry, you're dealing with things that they're not immovable, but certainly you have to play on the edges if you want to create something new.
Yeah, it's I don't understand it all, I'll be honest. We've got some really smart cookies here. We call them the smart cookies. I mean, Stephen, who is our R&D manager, it's just incredible the amount of detail, the science behind it, the nuances of manufacturing are incredibly difficult and hard. That's why there's not that many people who actually are in this world, in the extrusion world, is because it's not easy. But yeah, I'm actually surrounded by chemists, which makes it interesting from a sales point of view. But it's lucky I have a good understanding of basic understanding of chemistry and how it all works. But yeah, they mix this and they mix that, and it comes out, and I go, yes, I'll sell that.
From that sales perspective, and knowing what your group of scientists there, the clever cookies can create, who would be the best type of organisation to connect you with in terms of accelerating your productization of those biopolymers, the polynatural and so on?
So, I mean, we have a collab with Scion. So that's based out of Rotorua. We've actually been working for them with 12 years now. So it goes back a long way. We stepped it up a gear in the last sort of 2 years, 3 years. And because they have a massive team that work on these sort of things. I mean, this is one of their key goals, is to grow the bioeconomy in New Zealand and through that. So through them, we're developing quite a network of customers, end users to work with, and trial through to trying to develop the infrastructure within New Zealand, so we can manufacture everything in New Zealand, to opening up doors overseas, because when it comes to the bioeconomy, certainly Europe, I mean, they're spending 6 billion euros a year on developing this. There's 126 different projects on within the EU at the moment. So we're not the only ones who are chasing this goal, but we're all going about it slightly different, but New Zealand has a unique opportunity because we have the biomass here, because we have the raw material here to really stamp our mark and significantly do a contribution to the country. They're doing scientific analysis, and they reckon that it's about 6 billion in exports that could potentially be done in New Zealand in the bioeconomy. So, yeah, there's a significant prize there, but no one in this country can do it alone. And this is why, doing collabs, working together and doing it that way is a far better way of going about it than everyone trying to do the same thing and biting each other's, meal essentially, and not getting anywhere. It's a significant amount of investment that we're putting in over the next few years. It's millions into this field. So, and we've already sunk a bit of money into it already. So, there's a lot of investment that we're putting into it to make sure it succeeds.
That's really positive to hear, because it when you invest early, you'll get to go through a lot more learning cycles about what is possible. And when either regulation comes or whether the change in customer perception is the driver, then you become more better positioned for it. And the example I was thinking of was in Europe with IEEE, where manufacturers were charged with looking after the waste of their electrical components. So all the way through the supply chain, not just produce the good and sell it and then it's not your problem anymore. I can see that similar way of working coming to plastics or coming to goods that have components in them. And if EPL is playing a part of that component and saying, well, this doesn't have a waste component, or it breaks down naturally in the environment, then suddenly that becomes more competitive than the one you have to work out how to recycle it or how to get it back to you to then reuse again. So there's some interesting things at play, I think, for goods manufacturers that get ahead of what's coming.
So interesting, in the last sort of couple of months, the government's released quite a few papers on this. So if the current government gets back in, there's going to be quite a bit of regulation around mandatory product stewardship, which is going to especially affect the agriculture sector, but a number of sectors where at end of use products have to go back to the manufacturer. We've recently, as in August the 17th, we've just done our first product stewardship product, where we've got a raw material which is polycycle, which is a mix of recycled and new material that can be recycled. And what we're doing is we've created a plant protector out of it. It's our design. And you talk about waste. We were going through the design process, and we were going through it, and we're looking at the manufacturing, and we looked at it and we were going, well, this is going to be actually quite a costly exercise because of the amount of waste coming out of it. So one of the engineering team looked at it and redesigned it, and automatically we took 18% waste out of it before we even started. Then in the manufacturing process, what we do, any wastage gets recycled back into the product anyway. So then, any offcuts, anything like that goes back in. And then we've launched our first sort of product stewardship scheme with the circular economy. So the way it works with the plant protectors is that you can stick them in the yellow bin, and you can do that at the end of life, and they'll get recycled because they're a number 2. You can reuse them, so they're designed to be reused multiple times, and for the feedback we've got, customers will do that. Or you can return them back to us, and this is that sort of model where In this instance, you can, you bring them back to us, we will munch them up and reuse them and put them back in. We've got a partnership with a recycling company here in Christchurch called Comspec. It was quite interesting as part of all this process of working this and developing this sort of system out. I calculated out how much we recycled last year, how much recycled material we used rather than virgin. It was 135 tonnes, and that's before we even started. And that's been the other interesting thing about going through this process is how much of this sort of stuff we do anyway, or we look to do and we've done, and we're just going through a process where we're kind of formalising it and putting it all into one place. When it comes to those sort of schemes, 70% of a product, 70% of its effectiveness in being recycled starts at the design stage. So when you come into the material selection, what you're going to use it for and what you're going to do at end of life. So that's the stage. And, without even knowing it, the team here have been doing this for a while, which is pretty cool to see. And this is one of the cool things I love about this company. It's just chugging along in the background and these people just do it anyway. There's no banner around it, no sidestep. I mean, we've been obviously recycling and reducing our waste. We've had targets around our waste for decades around reducing our waste and product improvement, and we've tracked it for ages. So it's all those sort of things that all come into this sort of systems thinking when you're looking at product stewardship. But the regulatory environment around that is changing. I mean, we've seen plastic bags go. And that's just the start of it. They've released several new products that will go. Rightly or wrongly, that's what they're saying. So we're just going to have to adjust and work to that environment.
I think it's an interesting space in that there's been a real shift in how when you say product stewardship at a component or an atomic level, it's about how you look after the atoms that you create and also the ones that you source. And I think, at least from the research I've read, is that those atoms, to get them out of the ground, became cheaper and cheaper over the 20th century. And over the 21st century, they're expected to become more and more expensive. And if that's the case, as a manufacturer, why would you want to sell and lose control of that atom, right? Whether it's a polymer or whether it's timber, if you could somehow get it back from your customer, like what you're doing there, and not just recycle it, but actually remanufacture. And that's what Apple's doing with their iPhones is, trade in the iPhone, at least in the US, and they will remanufacture that unit. And of course it made sense, right? They get to sell the same atoms over and over again without having to dig them up. And so you become more of a service business in a way.
Yeah, we've only got finite resources, and especially when it comes to cell phones and some of the materials within cell phones, they are highly rare. You cannot afford all our cell phones to go to the rubbish dump. We need to mine it back. And so it's in Apple's interest to do that, but it's also in the world's interest to do that. And the more that sort of thing happens, the better it will be.
I'm glad to hear that you're leading the charge in terms of the polymer side of things and looking at what you can do in the natural space to reduce the impact on the environment and doing that at the design stage. And it also seems like for an organization like yours that's been around for 4+ decades, there will be a huge amount of intellectual property that's sitting there so that you're not doing this just off for the first time. There's a whole lot of research that you can call on to know what's most likely to work.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. We were the first company to bring Centre Cream in and use in the window joinery industry. It's now an industry standard. We actually worked with ExxonMobil with that, or the ExxonMobil bought the company that we used to that manufactured it. And it's quite interesting the parallels between what we're doing there back then and what we're doing now, and introducing it. The TPVs probably in the windows around you right now. Just about every window has one of those seals, and we were the first company to do it. And then using those learnings into what we're doing now, it's really cool. It's really interesting to see. And because we got such an experienced team, they've been there, done that, got the T-shirts, completely different how the polymers behave, how they react, and almost what machinery you need. But that process is still there. Certainly in the last sort of 2 years, I've spent quite a bit of time honing the innovation process. A lot of people just think the innovation process is just free willy true. Get a blank piece of paper and just go at it with ideas in it. But you've got to have some commercial reality about it, and you've got to have some process around it. But my favourite saying is curiosity breeds creativity, creativity breeds innovation. And that's, to me, the definition of innovation. So it's been quite interesting managing this process through this to ensure that A, we don't chase too many rabbits down rabbit holes and go off tangents, and B, we focus on what is the most efficient use of time. So we've been actually really disciplined about that especially in the last 18 months.
Is there, actually I've got two questions. Is there anyone I can connect you with within the New Zealand made group of manufacturers, not knowing what you talked about in depth in your strategy earlier this year, but is there any, who would be one of the ideal customers or stages of business that they're at to kind of move you ahead?
That's the real interesting thing about us, is because during the COVID, we were manufacturing components for COVID masks that Southmed were doing. So we were doing the silicon hood out of that. We supply silicon into Fisher & Paykel Healthcare and all those sort of companies, Fisher & Paykel, Resin, all sorts of different companies in agriculture, medical, marine based, the viticulture. It's just phenomenal, all the different industries that we actually touch. And it goes back to that point where, we develop one product for one particular customer. And so that's led us down so many different paths, windows, and all sorts. So we're really open to working with anyone, that needs an extrusion at scale and needs the volume through. The unfortunate thing, like all New Zealand manufacturing businesses, with the volumes going down, it's becoming harder and harder for the small volume producers for it to be viable, which is sad, but that's just the transition the New Zealand economy is going through. But yeah, our skill set is just vast. It's really hard to define. When we did the new website, it was quite interesting sitting everyone down and going through, okay, what are our markets? Even what countries we export to. It was, there's a nice little graphic on our website. We're exporting into China, we're exporting into the States, we're exporting all over the world, South Africa. And people were like, and within the team were like, really, do we? It's, so we're open to connecting with anyone from extrusion.
I'll read out some of the industry categories you've got here on your website for the audience. there's medical, marine, packaging, automotive, appliances, building, food manufacturing. We've got at least a couple of hundred food manufacturers.
Yeah.
Window joinery, we've talked about viticulture, we've talked about horticulture, and dairy, of course.
Yes. Yeah, so it's it's fast, and it's also interesting, and I can't really talk about them, but the products that we manufacture for other companies that pop up, that we manufacture on behalf of, and that's quite cool to see.
That's one of the interesting parts when I joined Buy New Zealand Made, is that we get to see some of those relationships, those contract manufacturing relationships that aren't public knowledge, and it's fascinating actually how much of a interlaced network it is that a lot of companies actually work together in order to create innovative products.
Yeah, and the other thing is the lead time that some of these developments take. You know, they can take years. It can be a phenomenal long time, but it's been really interesting, once again, post-COVID, COVID is a topic, how some of these firms are sort of throwing out the rule book and developing things faster and cutting the red tape and trying to get things pushed through faster to respond, which is good to see. But then they get caught up with some of the regulatory requirements haven't caught up with that need for fast innovation yet.
I think COVID is more an accelerant than it is a transformation event. It's not shifting people to do entirely different things. It's just accelerating some of the things that were already in train. And I think it's been, at least for me personally, quite surprising just how quickly things can get done when there's a will and a desire to make it happen. Yeah,
it's been some of the things that New Zealand have done in this period is it's mind blowing. Really, and you know, these clever cookies and what these people are doing around the world. And even if you look at the vaccine, like a lot of people are really worried that the vaccine's happening too fast. And time will tell, you know, whether A, they get one, or B, you know, how effective it is. But isn't it awesome to see how quickly the world's mobilised and how they're working together? You know, Scion's working on helping with vaccines. There's lots of companies in Australia working towards it. Monash University's very close to it. I see a university in China's come out and said, yeah, we've got it. You see the Russians, what they're doing, but it is actually cool seeing how quickly people are mobilising to get a resolution as fast as they possibly can.
It's been great to see, and I think it'll be interesting to see whether that pace becomes part of the new way we do business, because there are some things that we've removed in terms of costs of time. So I'd like to talk to you today. You're in Christchurch, I'm in Wellington, and this has become the norm, at least for my meetings. It's reducing carbon emissions for the guests having to travel. And although I love to do the factory tour, and I do want to get down and actually go through EPL and have a chat to some of your team and actually see what you produce, the story behind it, at least we can do this way. And you know, between Hugh and I this year, we've done a whole lot more of these chats than we would have ever done if we'd gone out and physically got on a plane to each city.
Yeah, well, we've got no other choice but to do it this way, unfortunately. It is. I do miss that pre-COVID, the customer sit downs and the ability to just jump on a plane and get anywhere. It is hurting. It is hampering things and developing. Whereas before, you know, if you wanted to check something out, you just jumped on a plane and went. It's a little more difficult, and I'm struggling a little bit as to how, with new market opportunities, how that's going to go forward, because there's nothing like being there and seeing it for yourself. The thing I love is going and seeing customers and walking around and then putting, you know, two and two together and then coming up with the solution. That's what I love doing. So you kind of miss that. But at the same time, isn't it great, that we can do here, we can sit down, we can talk, we can see each other. I could be anywhere in the world and we could be having this conversation, and it's, the way technology is adapting and getting up to speed is fantastic.
I'd certainly seen some interesting things being produced this year, and I hope for EPL that given that period of time that you've worked on the strategy and you've been forced to probably do more innovation than go out and do as many sales, I hope that that rebalances next year now that we're down to level 1, and touch wood, we stay here for a period of time, and we can kind of get back to some type of normal.
Yes, yeah, totally agree.
Hey, look, Gareth, it's been really good to speak with you today and hear what you've been doing, and to hear a little bit more about your role with EPL and what those clever cookies and the science department are coming up with. And I really look forward to you keeping me in the loop of what's coming up next, particularly on those natural polymer side of things. I think that could be a really interesting space with some of the partnership work you've been doing with Scion.
Sounds great. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.